Abbreviated version of Worldview Junior Edition, the Year of Indigenous Peoples, is a program with and for young people, with excerpts from the contributions of participants. The program touches upon the history and traditions, the problems, and present and future solution possibilities. Although the diversity of the world's indigenous peoples is emphasized, this program listens primarily to the voices of several Native Americans. Additional guest participation will be added, as will titles, continuity, and the theme song, diversity. The thunder and the power of music comes to us from the ancient cultures of the world, from the first peoples. Some of these first peoples recently gathered at the United Nations. Peoples such as the Kuku-Yalanji, known as Aborigine, from Australia, who painted their bodies and their faces with ochre in respect for the importance of the meeting. And the Sami people from northern Scandinavia, which outsiders call Lapland, whose songs tell of long dark winters and the summer sun that doesn't set, and of loss. And representatives from the native peoples of the continents and the islands of the Americas. Representatives of many peoples came together to share this world meeting ground as the forum for seeking solutions to common problems and to compare their individual and common goals. As with many important ceremonies, it began with music, with the pulse and the passion of dancing feet, and with the heartbeat of drums. Hello and welcome to our circle of friends. I'm Beryl Bernay, here with some very special people who have come together to share their very special experiences and ideas with each other and with you.
My name is Sleepy Isle Framboise, and I am half Sioux and half Seneca. And my name comes from, I'm named after my fifth generation great-grandfather, he was a Sioux chief, but he must have been pretty influential because they named a town after him in Minnesota. I grew up with my parents always, teaching me to have pride in who I am and what I am and my culture. And up until that time, I began to develop a lot of prejudice towards white people, because I'd go to school and, they'd start going woo 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 and things like that, and call me chief. And I was always aware of many human rights violations that were faced upon my people, and many of the atrocities that we went through, and all the 500 years of genocide that my people faced, and many of the awful things that were done to my people. That's all I knew, and that's all I just thought it was my people, and why did this happen to my people? Why do we have to go through this? But when I went to Vienna, my eyes all of a sudden just opened up, and because there were children from all parts of the world. There were around 175 children, close to 200 children there from about 175 nations, I think it was. And I began to realize that it wasn't just my people, it was people from all over the world. And at that time, I just began to develop some kind of caring for these people, as well as my people. But I began to realize that it's all over the world that this is happening, not just here in the U.S.
I should begin by saying what UNITY is. It stands for United National Indian Tribal Youth. And it's an organization of Native youth all across Native America. I am the president of our youth council, and I'm also the representative in the National Youth Council. We really wanted to get involved in it because the goals that this youth group focused on were sobriety and sovereignty and heritage, culture, language, their environment, and that's what we really wanted to focus on. because we were having some problems on the reservation.
Elsa, please tell us first, how does the UN define indigenous people?
In fact, the UN does not have a formal definition because we believe that indigenous people want and do define themselves, first of all. But by the term indigenous people, we mean the people who originally inhabited the land and were later colonized or subjugated by another culture, and they suffered oppression and often extinction and exploitation, and they still suffer that exploitation, but they want to keep their identity and to develop their culture, their language, and their whole sense of themselves. And that's why, based on the information that we have been receiving for decades in the United Nations, we started a lot of work from early on, and this has culminated now into this international year, which we think, as from next year, is going to become a decade.
It all really started in the beginning of the UN with Eleanor Roosevelt, didn't it? Eleanor Roosevelt was a pioneer in implementing international cooperation. At the beginning of the United Nations, she was an important United States delegate. She was instrumental in formulating the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
In a document of this kind, to be sure, there are areas of the world where people don't today even know what it means, what a human right is. The statement of hopes and aspirations and principles.
She wanted every child to have the opportunity for education, a healthy and productive life, wherever their homeland, whatever their heritage. Many indigenous people had been forced not only to abandon the teachings of their heritage, but even to lose knowledge of its value. For example, the ancient Inca civilization in what is now Peru, using intricate, sophisticated engineering and agricultural skills at least as far back as 1500 AD, built the complex mountain city of Machu Picchu. The surviving indigenous people in that area, known as Quechua Indians, are part of Peru's underclass, for the most part unaware of their brilliant past. In recent years, some indigenous peoples have begun to fight for their rights. Among them, the Ainu in Japan, who recently demonstrated in Tokyo. The Waorani Indians in Ecuador, who as a result of their demonstrations and protests succeeded, after their forests were destroyed, in persuading the government not only to give back some of their land, but to recognize their right to self-government. Human rights include the right to live a decent daily life with respect for the land and the water, the right to have adequate nourishment and shelter, the right to self-determination, the right to one's way of life. Many indigenous peoples have special ways of life. The Samis in their Arctic climate always depended upon the reindeer for food and clothing and shelter, as did the Inuit on their seals and bear, and the Native Americans of the plains on their buffalo. Through colonization and oppression, many indigenous people lost not only their rights but their lives. The native peoples of Australia, known as Aborigine, used to number about 15 million. They now number less than 300,000.
They're not really rocks. They're the persons in dreaming time.
These indigenous people revere their prehistory and spiritual identity, which they call dream time, the origin of their beliefs, their culture, and their arts.
And as a person who travels both in the indigenous world and in
Buffy St. Marie, a
city
Native
world,
American spokesperson,
I find a
hosted
hunger
indigenous
for
cultural
knowledge
performances
about
at the
good
United
works.
Nations.
I also find a hunger for knowledge about indigenous people. But as you look at us tonight and as you listen to us upstairs, I hope you can get beyond our pretty costumes, our colorfulness, our feathers, our paint, our sequins, and our quaintness. and see what it is that we have to offer. Look further to the genius of Indigenous people, because it's not being tapped. We have much, much, much to contribute.
Among the Indians of the Americas who have been oppressed are the indigenous peoples of Guatemala. Nobel Peace Prize recipient Rigoberta Menchú was appointed UN Goodwill Ambassador for the special year. She said the struggle for human rights is not just a fad of the moment, it is a permanent commitment, it is a struggle of a lifetime. The Year of Indigenous People was launched with the ringing of the United Nations Peace Bell.
I am not confident of being a leader. That's one thing I learned: confidence, trust. I can trust people now. That's something I never used to do.
And had you learned something before about Native American culture?
Yes, before I used to go through books, but not much. It was in this camp that I experienced culture. I went into a sweat lodge. I was the firekeeper there. Had the privilege of being the firekeeper. Did it for 3 consecutive nights, and I think Sleepy can take over from me.
Sleepy Eye, tell us about a sweat lodge. The purpose and what you do.
A sweat lodge is called a purification ceremony, and it was given to my Sioux people. And what it does is you go in there, because my people believe that the only thing that you can give, the only thing that you own is your body. So what you go in there to is to give back to the Creator, something that the only thing you can give back. So you go in there to purify yourself and to sacrifice and to show the Creator how much you care for Him and how much you care for other people. But one thing that was really interesting in this sweat lodge was that in Sioux we have 4 main colors that represent the 4 races. And that's red, white, yellow, and black. And it was really interesting because all those 4 colors were represented in the sweat lodge from all the nations. And there were children from all different nations inside the sweat lodge, and they all, and at certain times they would all pray in their own different languages.
The Sundance I went to took place on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, which is where I'm from, Pine Ridge is one of the many reservations in South Dakota, and it's huge. There's different Sundances that you can go to. There's some Sundances holds where you could have different nationalities dance, but this Sundance in particular only had Native Americans dancing. And the purpose of having a Sundance is, to pray for strength and purify yourself. And you get healed during the last day of the sun dancing. It's to pray for your family, for yourself, for your ancestors, the present, the past, for the young people especially.
The teachings shared by indigenous peoples in their respect and care for nature, for creatures, and for each other have been ignored by most so-called developed nations for much too long. The accidental explosion at Chernobyl in the then Soviet Union was a disastrous example of how inadequately protected technology can cause contamination and destruction. It affected not only the immediate area, but wherever the wind carried its poisons. Thousands of reindeer, the lifeline of the Sami people in northern Scandinavia, had to be slaughtered because they were sick with radioactive poisoning. The air of some major cities has been dangerously polluted. Waters all over the world have been polluted by mindless industrial waste, by oil spills and poisonous fumes. Cattle die of starvation where lands have been stripped of growth, where spreading deserts have made people homeless, dependent upon refugee rations. Poverty forces children to search for food in disease-ridden garbage. And the rainforests, so essential for nature's balance, continue to be cut to barrenness by heavy machinery. People concerned only with filling their pockets today ignore the cost of this destruction to the children of tomorrow and to peoples dependent upon the water, the land, and the forests for their food and their lives. Many indigenous representatives from all over the world told the United Nations Forum of the grief this careless greed has cost their people.
Many of us are now hungry. Trees and vines with poisonous barks are felled and find their way into the streams, killing all the fish. Mud from the eroded land pollutes the rivers, bringing us diseases and destroying our source of drinking water. Even when we mark our burial ground, the logging companies bulldoze through them with no regard for our feelings. Hundreds of graveyards have been destroyed in this way. When we complain about the destruction, they sometimes offer us a small sum of money as compensation. But this is an insult to us. How can we accept money that is traded for the bodies of our ancestors?
What do you think the world would be like without indigenous people, or if everyone was just one color and everyone looked exactly alike? Well, the first thing, it would be definitely a boring place to live. But I said it would be like a world without color. It would just be one single color. But this world definitely needs color, and it needs all the colors to be shined out together and to be respected together. And like what happened in that video is something that has happened to my people many, many times, you know. Like you said, the non-indigenous people have to be educated and know their indigenous people from where they come from and know their history, to know both sides of history, not just one.
1993 is the International Year of the World's Indigenous People, and that was followed from 1992, which was kind of a difficult year for many of us as Native Americans to walk through, as this Western world, the Western experience was being celebrated in the words of the quincentennial and the discovery language and Columbus trip, and a lot of money was spent in the United States in particular to celebrate that particular adventure. And we took many opportunities as best as we could in different ways that we could to try to get people to reflect on about the very language that we use to talk about that time, to try to get people to reform their thinking. So the year of 1993 is a lot more optimistic in a sense in terms of it opening up a broader dialogue for many peoples, and the experience that Sleepy Eye has shared about making that connection with other experiences of indigenous people around the globe is a very important one.
Tell us a little bit about what's being done, about solutions, about solving some of this, or about trying to solve it and looking towards solutions.
You know, solutions start from the local level and they go to the international level, and the fight has to be at all levels. None of the levels by itself is sufficient, because we're talking now also about political power, okay? And it's getting together the indigenous people, joining their voices, because this is a world where not only spiritual but also crude political power matters a lot. So the solutions have to come through the direct participation of indigenous representatives at all the fora of the United Nations that concern them, their participation in projects that concern them and that other people supposedly do on their behalf. We have to hear what kinds of things they want for their own community, what kind of development they want. I want to repeat and stress that the indigenous people, the same way that they have pushed a little crack and they have made a big door into the United Nations, they have to continue. It's not easy, but history needs the courage of people.
Sienna has a poem she's written that I think we'd all like to hear before our visit with you ends. Sienna.
My American heritage. I am of the first people of this land, living at this place called At the Level Land, Shinnecock. They sing a song on a drum We drum the drum to dance the dance. We send thankful thoughts to our spirits that spread through our land. The crow calls to you in morning. From the spirits in their thoughts, we shall always continue.
Now Sleepy Eye is going to lead us in a circle dance that's a dance of friendship. Sleepy Eye, would you say goodbye in your language?
We don't say goodbye in my
What do you
language,
say?
but we say see you later.
Better.
And that's Eskongayai.
Everybody try. Escongaye. Try it.
Escongaye.
Good. In what language?
Seneca.
In Seneca. Escongaye. Let's do the dance.